And now
All right, good. All right. Hi, I'm Alex Liu with ImpulseSF. I'm here with comedian Joel Kim Booster. You might recognize Joel from some of his performances on Conan, his half-hour Comedy Central special, or his debut album Model Minority. Joel will also be performing in San Francisco at Clusterfest on Friday, June 1st, I believe.
That is correct.
All right.
All that whole weekend, actually.
Oh, you will? Oh, great. Oh,
Friday,
great.
Saturday, and
Okay, so you
Sunday.
should catch him then. And thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I want to start with something I read that you said that I loved. You describe your comedic persona as outrageously dumb.
Yes.
Okay, so explain that. What do you mean exactly? Describe your persona.
I think for me, it's a freeing sort of cop-out in a lot of ways, in sort of how I approach joke writing.
my name, it's very strange. It does not match my face. Joel Kim Booster. Why? Joel up top there, that seems pretty Jewish. Doesn't make any sense at all. Kim in the middle, that seems closer. And then Booster right there at the end, well, that's just a word. It's not a name at all. What's happening there? And the reason I have this very goofy name is, yes, I was adopted by a nice white Midwestern couple in the mid-'80s, like many Korean babies were. Korea in the mid-'80s, if you were around, you probably remember, it was the only country that would fly a baby to the US, and you didn't have to go and pick it up. So it was very much the Grubhub of babies back then.
At the beginning of my career and when I was first, on the scene, there's a lot projected on you as a person of color and as a gay person and, representing the adoptee community too. It's a lot of pressure, and I think that there's a lot of pressure to speak on those issues intellectually. And I felt that pressure at the onset, and I felt very not stifled, but it just wasn't natural to like the kind of comedy that I wanted to do and the kind of comedy that I wanted to write about. And it's not to say that I don't think the comedy in itself, the final product is stupid on its face. I do think the jokes are clever. There's thought.
I would agree. Yeah.
But I think like thematically for me, I'd like to take it from a point of view of a very simple person because that I think like inside is who I am and what attracts me to comedy. It's not that I don't want to talk about the experiences of racism or homophobia. I get into that. I do talk about it, but I don't. It just like I would find myself like sort of in the early years being really heavy with it and really trying to like take it from angles that just didn't feel like it was jiving with my comedic sensibilities. I studied gender studies in college. I read a lot of the news, but it's not fun. It's just there was no sense of joy in those jokes that I was writing. So when I started to really like sort of fold into this character, this sort of overblown version of myself that was an idiot, just a hot idiot. It was just a more fun like point of view to play in as a comedian. So that's sort of where I'm leaning more towards now.
And so, where part of your lives does that hot idiot manifest? And where do you see that?
I think it just taking everything apart and making. So I think like the world is big and scary right now and awful and terrible. We all are scared all the time and angry all the time, walking around. And I think for me, part of the ease of speaking in the voice of that character, that is a little bit of me, represented, is taking some of these big ideas and breaking it down into the smallest, like most minute sections and tackling it from the mind of like a very simple person. I think it makes it easier to write jokes about it, and B, like the perspective of a stupid person who's not really paying attention is I think funnier to me than trying to like tackle it from somebody who does read the New Yorker cover to cover. It's just not it's not interesting, and I don't know. I think it's funnier to come at it from a place that is obviously stupid. But I could be wrong. People might not be into that. Go listen to NPR if that's not what you like.
No,
I love NPR.
And so that kind of, I was talking about that. You titled your debut album "Model Minority."
Yes.
How did you come to that time?
I mean, it's obviously it's the play on Asian Americans are often called the model minority for a myriad of reasons. We're used as sort of an example of like, well, they did it, so why can't you? To every other oppressed minority, which is, I mean, that myth has been debunked over and over and over and over again. And I think because I don't represent a lot of what the ideals that a lot of conservatives and people on the right like to point to the Asian American community and say that's what makes them a model minority. I wanted to sort of it's sort of a middle finger to that, and then also like embracing being hot is a big part of that as well. I think like as an Asian man in America, and especially as an Asian gay man in America, I think I learned really early on when I came out and started entering into the gay community that I was not valuable, and that I was not attractive, and that I was not something that people wanted. And it took me years to sort of break out of that mindset about myself that I was getting from interactions on dating apps or with people in bars and stuff like that. And like it took me a long time to just like look at myself in the mirror and like find myself attractive and be like, no, this guy is hot, and just to sort of embrace that. And honestly, like through comedy, like I embraced it in my act and in my persona way before I actually think I embraced it like internally. I don't think I ever really internalized it until the last couple of years, and comedy actually sort of brought me there.
So it sounds like you are kind of consciously trying to play with the Asian model minority by being outrageously dumb, let's say,
Yeah.
and kind of challenging and kind of.
Yeah, I think that I am an extremely like emotionally intelligent person, a very socially intelligent person, and that's developed over the years. And I don't think like when you think of like the intelligence of the Asian American community, I think what's represented oftentimes is like people in STEM fields, which is so valid and so great, and I think it's amazing, and I respect and admire anybody who has the mind for that. But I remember like growing up, and especially like coming out of being homeschooled and going to public school, like constantly feeling like people's expectations of how smart I would be just didn't line up with how actually smart I would be. I remember specifically like in math classes, like whenever we'd have to pair up for something, white girls would always like rush to me, and I felt like it was such a bait and switch. I was like, oh, I'm so sorry, you're wrong. Like this is not going to turn out the way you thought it would be. I know nothing. And sort of in the arts especially, like sort of being not ignored, but you do have to like work a little harder, I think, sometimes as an Asian person to be taken seriously in those fields, because there is the expectation of like that person is going to be great at math but not know how to talk at a party. And that's just so the flip side of me. And so representing, I always feel like I represent like so many things that are anathema to what has been pushed onto the Asian American community as stereotypes, and so sort of taking back like what a model minority actually means is always been sort of important to me in my work.
And so the first joke I ever saw you perform was on Conan, in which you kind of basically lay out, I'm Joel Kim Booster, how does someone who looked like me have that name, And you guys have been talking around this, but is that something that you find audiences really need to know up front? Is it something that's been a challenge?
Yeah, it's frustrating actually. It's like a weird, it's another privilege that other people who are not adopted have, especially being a transracial adoptee. It's annoying to me that I have to have that joke in there for context, because there are other jokes. I have a joke right now that I'm working on, and I'm not going to tell the whole joke, but the end of the joke is, this sort of stinger is, if I wanted to watch a white woman struggle to make guacamole, I'd go home to the Midwest and watch my mom do it. And like, when I have a shorter set, like it's like 10 minutes, and I'm just trying to get through new stuff, I'm not talking about being adopted every time. Like, it's not a part of every joke I ever write. And so it is frustrating, like working on that joke specifically in a smaller set. I have to like figure out a way to like get that in there, because otherwise that joke does not work. If people are like, wait a minute, you have a white mom? Like it immediately stops everything dead. And so like I have to come up with things like the name, like the name joke actually specifically came out of people constantly asking me and constantly being confused and like being brought up as Joel Kim Booster.
Like in your daily life or
daily life always, like in comedy and in the industry, people were always asking like, where did you get Booster? Which is a valid, and the thing is, and the joke comes from like, that's a valid question. Like Booster, just in general, is a weird name. I think even if no matter what race I am, like people would probably ask about the name. I think the frustrating thing for me right now, as I'm moving into this sort of second phase of my career, is that that first album had so much material about my childhood and my family and growing up adopted and like the experience and the dysphoria of being adopted in a white family. And that will probably always be a well that I return to for material. But right now, I feel sort of like I've closed the loop on a lot of that. I'm not sure right now at this point. I don't have a whole lot else to say about it. So it's frustrating that I have to find ways to now work it in, and sort of I'm like pushing myself. There's a lot of bad jokes in the new material that are specifically there to point the audience and like let them know that what's going on with me, so that I can do jokes where I reference my mom and everybody knows that it's a white woman, and it's frustrating.
So I do want to ask one question about your name. I was curious. Is Kim a throwback to your Korean heritage?
Yeah, my parents, when they adopted me, Kim is my birth surname. One of the many Kims on the island of Jeju. And I think they just wanted to honor and respect my heritage and included that in my legal name. There is so much confusion in my family. My parents disagree on this. There's no documentation that can confirm or deny this. My mom says that she always intended it for me to have like a hyphenated, for it to be like my last name. And my dad says it's my middle name. Okay. So it's actually kind of a legal nightmare for me because my passport has it as my last name and my driver's license has it as my middle name. So I don't know how that happened, but it is terrible for me.
So yeah, your album does cover a lot. Just on the top of that, racism, religion, adoption, science, homophobia, pornography, sexuality, relationships, even eating meat.
Yes.
And I think, you're kind of getting at this, a lot of it kind of, to me, does deconstruct all these topics, kind of skewering the cultural expectations of gay and or Asian men. Mm-hmm. How much of your career do you see it being like having to do that,
I think right now, a lot of that, I think right now I have to do that because there are only so many of us out there that are talking about it, like in terms of stand-up. Like Nico Santos is another amazing gay Asian American stand-up comic, but he's busy being an incredible movie star on Superstore, and he's in Crazy Rich Asians, so he's not doing the stand-up stuff as much. He's not able to, and so until there are 12 of us, until the market is flooded with Asian American gay male stand-up comics, I do feel like we're all sort of pushed into like writing these jokes. I've always said like, some of my biggest detractors on the internet, my biggest trolls, the people who are the loudest about hating my material on YouTube or Facebook or any other platform tend to be either Asian men, gay men, or gay Asian men.
Interesting.
And I understand that frustration because when you are only given one option in terms of representation, it sort of becomes like you have to represent everybody, or some people will always feel left out and mad. And my prayer to them and to those people is always like there are more of us, and there are also like, then go and do it yourself, which is like, it sounds glib, it sounds like I'm being a bitch, but I'm not. It's just like, go and create the content that you feel represents you. There's so many there are so many ways to do that, or throw money at people that are you feel representing you, because I shouldn't be the only one. I certainly do not have the atypical experience as a gay Asian man in this country, and there shouldn't be just one experience being represented for all of us.
What are they saying to you, and
I think like a lot of it just stems from it's actually a mix of things. Like, if it's such a weird prism, the internet, because like some people think I'm too flamboyantly gay, or some people think that I'm representing the gay community incorrectly, and a lot of straight Asian men. I've seen this come in a million times of just like, great, we finally have an Asian man on TV and he has to be gay and or like feminine or what have you, or any number of those sort of critiques, or like I talk about sex too much, or
I see.
I do racial. I talk about my race too much. It's just you're never gonna find the right balance, and that is like a lesson that I had to learn very quickly after Conan, because it just was like such a shock to me to have like that exposure early in my career, and then to like get all of that feedback all at once. And I probably shouldn't read the comments, but it's always nice to hear from the fans.
So let's talk about a lot of the material on Model Minority. Starting from the beginning, you mentioned your parents adopted you from South Korea. You've also mentioned that they're very dedicated Southern Baptists,
Yes.
I believe. Yeah.
Yes.
Did their religion play into a part about why they considered adoption?
Yeah, I think so. I think like in the evangelical church in general at the time, there was always this feeling of sort of like, we've got to rescue the babies. And it's not necessarily coming from a negative place. I can't really like shade the church for saying like we have a call to adopt children. That's not something that I can necessarily be mad at. But there is a definite like sort of whiff of it being a fad in a sense. Like I have a lot of cousins that are actually adopted as well from Korea or other Asian countries or African countries, and most of the other people of color that I was interacting with when I was in like a preteen was at my church, and they were other adoptees from different countries, from other families. So yeah, I do think that that definitely played a big part in it.
And how strict was your religious upbringing?
Oh, it was very strict.
Like, in what sense?
Everything was controlled. I think just all the minute details of my life were controlled specifically around the idea of pleasing God. Everything we watched, everything we were allowed to read or buy or purchase, the way we looked, the way we dressed, was all sort of through that lens of like, we're doing it for Christ. And and so that was I was like a powder keg, I think, by the time I reached adolescence of repression.
Yeah, and what were the expectations your parents had about how you would live your life? Or
living your life for God is like such a weird, nebulous goal. But that was basically it. It's so funny that growing up, my parents never talked to me about like what I wanted to be when I grew up, or like what professionally, or like goals or college or any of those things that parents normally talk to you about. It was all just sort of like, as long as you're a man of God, that's all that matters. And so that was like sort of the focus. And they, I would like bring up different aspirations that I might have had, and it was I just never remember getting like support, like practical support from them, because it was always like, well, it doesn't matter what you're doing as long as you're a man of God. And it was like, okay, but like also, can I go to college? That God is not going to pay for my education nor co-sign on my student loans. So can we actually like talk about the nitty gritty? But that never really happened.
Interesting. Wait, so so it's interesting. Even though you were not raised in an Asian household, the way you describe your upbringing in some ways kind of does actually mirror to me a stereotypical Asian upbringing. Kind of strict, culturally conservative parents, maybe a little isolated from American culture at large. Does that resonate with you at all? Do you find that point of connection with other Asian Americans?
Yeah, I definitely do, because there was just a lot of stuff of like, they would have to read everything before I would read it. There were so many locked channels, on the television, and like things. My parents, it was sort of like an ebb and flow though, because there would be times when they would sort of be easing up and like trying to figure out different ways to like control us without really controlling us. But it was I always knew like they were watching in some respect. But yeah, I guess I never really even thought that it was a very similar. I guess because like they were never strict about like school, and they were never strict about like academics at all or anything like that. They were only specifically like concerned about like what we were putting into our brain. which is, I guess, I would have preferred they, assigned us more homework.
So let's talk about that. You were homeschooled till you were 16. Does that mean your parents were your teachers?
Sort of. It was a very unorthodox way to homeschool your kids in that both my parents worked.
Okay.
My godmom, who's a friend of my mom's, would be at home with us during the day, but she had like a job that she could do from home, so she was doing her job and was just sort of there to make sure no one burned the house down. And my brother and I were sort of just like left to our own devices. They didn't really, there was no structure to what we were doing. Like they would sort of like hand us a math textbook and we would work our way through a math textbook, and occasionally, like I'm so glad I like love to read. I like really loved to read growing up, and so I would just devour like book after book, and then like, but there was no like any traditional sort of homework analyzing that. Like I remember just like a couple of months I would just spend every day. The only school I would do is they had bought us an American history textbook, and I just sat and read the textbook cover to cover, just like casually outside, like it was a fucking novel. And that was like how I did history that year. Which seems, I describe that to a lot of people, and they're like, how I did look, and I'm actually, I don't know how much I retained. But in terms of like learning like simple things like truly like U.S. geography, we never touched.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you who the 33rd president of the United States is, like any of this stuff. It was getting to public school and like the things that I was expected to know just from rote that is drilled into kids in the 3rd grade. I had no context for it all. It was embarrassing.
And in your act, you also talk about how like you, let's assume you had no sex education.
No.
Was there any abstinence-based sex education at all?
Yeah, I mean, we were getting that a lot at church
Yeah.
and in youth group and stuff like that. My parents also, before any of that, like I read a book called How to Talk to Your Kids About Sex from like a Christian perspective, and that was like sex ed for me. And then I think at like 14 or 15, my dad finally sat me down to like have the talk, and I was like, the ship has sailed. This is like, far too late. Like I already know all the stuff you're saying, and it was deeply humiliating, I think, for both of us to have that conversation.
So what was in this book that you read? What was the Christian perspective?
It was like truly all I really remember was the very last chapter, which was like maybe 6 pages on homosexuality, and that was it. And it's pretty boilerplate for Christian conservatives. It's choice, and God can take it away, and all this, that, and the other thing. So it wasn't anything, and it's sort of debunking like all the different things of like and I remember there was like one option. The third option is like, you can be gay, just never have sex or never be in love. Okay. And I was like, well, that's dark.
But also, so also the joke you make is that in your education, you are now a nationally ranked Bible quizzer. Is that?
Yeah, that was a big part of my life.
What is that?
So there were there were actually 2 different Bible quiz teams that I was on. One was affiliated with my church, and then the other was affiliated with this like, this is very hard to explain, but my sophomore year I went to like a co-op school that was run out of a church that no one was accredited to be teaching anything really. But that they also had a Bible quiz team, and so like that quiz team was literally, the team was in charge of like memorizing specific chapters of the Bible, and then we'd go to meets and they would ask random questions, either like quoting specific verses or like contextual questions about what happened in those. So at one point in my life I had the first 13 chapters of Acts memorized by rote, and I could rattle them off at any point in the day.
Wow.
Which was...
Did you enjoy that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it in part because I was good at it, I think. I have a good memory, and I slaughtered those kids in Bible quizzing.
And was your family, your parents proud of you for that? Was that something?
Yeah. I don't remember them being like, I mean, they never came to a meet.
Okay.
They weren't electrifying to watch, I have to tell you that. But I think I got a vague sense that they were proud of me.
You say your dad was an amateur pastor? Like, you had church services at your house?
I certainly don't think my dad would classify himself as an amateur pastor. What it was is that basically up until like I was like 11 or 12, we weren't going to like a physical church. It was just like church in the home, just our family, like my dad basically reading from the Bible, and then we'd discuss. And that was basically it. I'm not sure why we ever did that, but that's sort of like what they decided to do with us. I think my parents are pretty introverted, like stay-at-home people, and I honestly think like the fellowship part of church was a real big turnoff for them. I think they were really into God, and they just wanted to keep it to us and God for a long time.
Did going to church, seeing Pastor, your dad, or anything, influence your desire to perform or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, most of my first performances, like performing on a stage or performing publicly, was at church, and so I loved that aspect of it, and I loved the social aspect of it. I mean, that's the biggest like thing that separates me and the rest of my family is they're all sort of very introverted, shy, like homebody people, and I'm like, get me out in the world. I want to be around the people, and so I loved every part about church except for like the hour or so when I had to listen to some guy talk about the Bible. And then that was less interesting to me. But I love to sing, I love to stand, I love to shake people's hands, I love to eat the little pieces of bread. I loved it all, except for the actual, I think, substantive part. But.
And so you also say that you didn't really come out of the closet.
No.
Your parents found a journal you were
Yes.
keeping of the people you were sleeping with at the time.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what was the thinking behind keeping those lists, and what was going on there?
You know, I think this was just like a pre-social media era for me, and I had it in me though. I just wanted to share. I wanted to make lists. I don't know. I've never been a good journaler. I don't have it in me, and I think I just had this journal, and when you come home every day and you're living a double life and you don't have any outlet at home to like talk, and you can't share any of these new life experiences that are sort of, big deals, like, you just sort of go to your journal, and I guess I wasn't a super introspective kid. I just wanted to like keep a record of the facts of like, these are the things that I lied to my parents about this week. These are the guys that I've hooked up with this month. Like this happened, and then no commentary on it. But I guess I just wanted to keep a record of it. I was stupid.
How are you meeting these guys, and what was that experience?
I was also a big speech and debate kid in the Midwest, and that is just rife full of gay kids. So I was meeting gay kids all in the surrounding suburbs, and that was a big part of it. MySpace was a big way. It seems creepy on paper now, but in hindsight, it felt very innocent to just sort of like search MySpace for other gay kids in your area, and then just sort of like message them and be like, hey. And I mean, now I'd be like, what the fuck are you doing? But yeah, I think at least 2 of the high school boyfriends I met through MySpace.
Huh.
Yeah.
And so, you've said also that your brother came out. Mm-hmm. He's also gay.
He is.
This is your parents' biological son. I'm wondering, what were your parents' views on homosexuality before you both came out, and has it evolved since then?
I remember very specifically, like when I was like, I had to be like 7 or 8, very young, watching a 2020 special about these 2 men who had adopted some children, and my dad sort of like walked in, and he was watching, and he was like, this is wrong, like that's not okay. And I remember even at 7 or 8, like sort of pushing back and being like, but like those kids would be in an orphanage otherwise. Like, isn't that good? Like, isn't it better? And he very like sternly and like was like, no, it's never okay. And that memory has stuck with me in my brain, because it was another moment in my life where I was like, well, I guess I'm never doing this. They were pretty hardline evangelical about it. It's wrong, it's not okay, it's a choice, you can change it if you pray it hard enough, et cetera, et cetera.
And then I think there was like a pretty wide gap between my brother coming out and me coming out. I think it was like almost 7 years in between us coming out. And I honestly don't know exactly where we're at now. I was estranged from my parents for a chunk of time because of it, and we reconciled, and things are generally pretty healthy between us. We talk every once in a while, and you know, I love my parents, but the fact is I haven't had like a serious relationship ever, and I think that'll be the watershed moment when I call and say I would like to bring Brian home to family dinner. I think is when I'll know like where we're at actually. And maybe that's like me being a coward. Like I should probably just call them and be like, hey, you're cool, right? But it feels like, I don't know, I don't care to rock the boat right now with them just because they're not enough a part of my life that it matters to me what they think about it. I know that they love me and I'll love them either way too, but it's just not, it's not something that's vital to me. Like, it's not something that's vital to my like emotional health that they approve of my lifestyle anymore. I'm sort of past that point in my life.
Hey guys, I'm having a huge week. I just became an uncle for the first time, which is really great. Oh, my goodness. Thank you so much. I had nothing to do with it. It's pretty cool. It still feels good to be congratulated, though. I like that a lot. I like being an uncle. It's very cool. Less cool, I come from a very religious family, and there are a lot of people in my family who are concerned about me being around the baby because I'm gay. Which is so offensive to me because I can do so much better than some stupid baby, okay? Like, let's get one thing straight. Look at me, all right? That baby wishes, okay? My beautiful niece could do so well, all right? I see what they're saying now, all right.
All right, so the last part I want to talk about is part of your act, which I love, which is you talking about a threesome you had in a gym, Steve Room, which was interrupted by a bunch of straight men.
Yes.
But then at some point, the captain of your threesome basically tells these straight guys that if they're either going to join in or get out.
Yes.
And they do. And this seems to have had...
They get out. They don't join, I should say.
Yeah. And this seems to have had a profound impact on you.
Yeah,
I'm wondering how so.
I wouldn't say it was a profound impact. I mean, it was certainly like one of the most interesting like encounters I've had, like in being in a straight space, like hooking up with guys in a straight space like this, and truly every single fact of that story is true, down to like what the straight guys were talking about in the room, and it's one of the easiest jokes I've ever had to write because it honestly it's just a little bit of like writing around the details of what actually happened, but it was just like a moment where I think like maybe in my brain I saw the shift happening of like, you know, their like of owning power in that space in a weird way. And like I looked at that guy who told those men to like either like join in or get out, and I was like, wow, I wish I had the balls to like be so self-possessed to like do that. And he was aspirational. The story actually happened. The one lie of it is that I use stand-up time when I tell the story, which means I say this happened to me 2 weeks ago when it actually happened probably 6 or 7 years ago now. And I was like maybe 22 or 23 when it happened. And I like, when I started telling that story, I was like, I want to be that guy, like by the time I'm 30. And I feel like I'm probably still not that guy, but I'm well on my way.
Well, and let's talk about that. What is that aspiration you have? Is to be that guy? What is that guy? Who is that guy?
Just like sort of the not hiding of it. I think because like all of us, I mean, we all code switch a little bit, like when we go into these spaces. And now I find myself, especially like touring around the country, like going to places in like Birmingham or Wilmington, South Carolina, or like any of these places, I immediately feel, even though like my onstage persona is like as like me to the nth degree, I feel like sometimes like I need to like go in a little bit and be like, let's not, you know, throw my faggotry in front of all of these people's faces because I don't want to get beat up, and I don't want to make anybody uncomfortable. And I think the safety issue is like still sort of on my mind in this day and age, but less and less making people uncomfortable is not really something that I care about when I go in to these other areas of the country, because it's like easy to be me and be free in San Francisco or LA or New York, but it's a little bit of a different game when you're in Grand Rapids, Michigan. You know, it's not quite the same thing, and I think like not pushing it down and not sort of shielding it and just sort of being free is a big part of it, and like just refusing to code switch, I think is part of it. I mean, what that man was doing goes a little bit beyond code switching, but or refusing to. But for me, I think like that is sort of the general idea of what I found empowering about that moment, is just not ever, you know, being dishonest about who you are in any certain moment for the sake of the comfort of straight people.
Yeah, and one of the things I love you do in your act too is you're very upfront. You are confrontational. You do make straight people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
You ask some, I think, straight guys, you know, what was your last porn searches?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what about that appeals to you? You know, why is that part of your act?
Yeah, I guess that for me, like, I do think that no matter who you are, I have built a set, and it's been proven to me by traveling the country and the world that anybody can laugh. Gay, straight, black, white, whatever race or color or creed or denomination you are, you will laugh at the jokes because at the end of the day, they are well-written jokes. But for me, like personally, like I was told so often early in my career that I needed to make my experience general enough so that everybody could feel like they could relate to it, and like and not to like alienate, like don't alienate the crowd was like the big thing that I heard. And it was like, that's bullshit, because like I spend so much time watching stand-up comedy, and I spent so much time watching stand-up comedy at open mics and growing up watching other stand-ups, where it was like, this guy's experience is not my own, and I felt alienated, and I was still able to laugh. And it's like, if I can make a straight guy feel as uncomfortable and alienated as I felt watching a Dane Cook set, then I have done my job, you know? Because and no disrespect to Dane, I've worked with Dane, and I think he's funny. But it was never like, I never got the sense that like, this is for me, but I was still laughing. And if I can strike that balance with the heterosexual audiences that I'm performing for 90% of the time, then I think I've done what I've set out to do. I just don't need to be concerned about their comfort anymore in order to make them laugh.
And who are you getting that feedback from then? Why would you think that?
Other older comics who I love, and we're all like, their intentions were pure. I think their intentions were like, this is a kid who is funny and we want him to succeed, and from our frame of reference, in order to succeed from what we know of stand-up, people aren't going to be comfortable hearing about, you know, ass-eating jokes, you know, in middle America. And it's like, yes, they will if it's a funny enough joke. If it's a written enough joke. You can't just go out on stage and talk about your fucking asshole and just expect people to laugh. Because that's where we're at right now, I think, as a culture. And it's good for us, is that, like, by and large, like, you can't just go out as a gay man and do a minstrel show and straight people will laugh at it because the novelty of like the gay experience. Like, I do think we're moving beyond that. Like, you do have to be smart, and you do have to, like, I talk about my gay experience but I write jokes around it. It's not like just me going out and like doing the minstrel show. I'm not doing a show for their benefit. I am being authentically myself, and if it alienates them, I don't care, as long as they're laughing, you know?
Yeah, and one thing that I thought was a great choice, I loved it immediately, in your Comedy Central special, the shirt you were wearing. Mm-hmm. You know, it's an image of like this big burly man, he's bound and gagged. And I want to know, what was the thinking behind that choice?
The thinking behind that choice was when I knew I was doing the special and I was thinking about what I was going to wear, I put out the call online. I said I wanted to wear a queer Asian artist's work on my body in some capacity. And I got the shirt through Massive Goods. Shout out to Massive Goods. They're an incredible Asian-owned clothing company, and Ishii is an incredible person. She owns the company, and it's an apparel line that sort of celebrates the Asian male form and that culture. And she was kind enough to send me 1,000 shirts to choose from to wear. And it was really, that one I felt like, really, like, you knew what I was about immediately when you saw that shirt, of just like, this is me and what I stand for and like what I'm into. And if you don't like that, then you knew to change the channel immediately. So.
Oh, you know, did you get any feedback like you shouldn't wear that? That's alienating, anything like that?
No, I think at that point, most of the Comedy Central execs knew me pretty well to know that like I didn't give a shit about that. It was mostly practical of just like, they told us not to wear white, basically, was the big thing, and the shirt was white, and so I was a little nervous that they wouldn't let me do it because of that. But they actually were really accommodating for the shirt and stuff like that, and making sure that it was all like kosher for me to wear someone else's art and all of that stuff. So they were great about that.
So the last thing I want to talk to you about, we'll start with in your act, you talk about how, I think you were in Arizona, and there's a gay man that comes up to you and says, like, you're the reason why my parents don't like gay people.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, you kind of did talk about this, but do you still get that experience going out? And I'm wondering if sex and sexuality, I don't know exactly what he was reacting to. Is that still kind of hard?
Yeah, I think it's the sex and sexuality thing, and I think it's this. It's weird because I feel like some gay men feel alienated because they aren't. They don't feel over-sexualized, and they aren't into like the sex part of our culture, and I get that, but I think that feeling like that's not me can very quickly sort of turn into that. Then why is that everybody? It's the why is everybody's going to think that's me, and that is sort of just. That's the struggle of being any sort of minority, is having everything you do pathologized for the rest of the group. And I get that, but it's also not my problem. It's not my problem to fix that. It's not my problem to censor like who I am. I have never come out and claimed that like this is who the gay community is. Like this is how every gay person is. This is my gay experience. And some people will identify with that, and that will resonate with some people, and some it won't with others. And I think like there's a plurality of gay experiences that are being represented right now in the media. Not enough, but I think some people just get a very tunnel vision view when they see them. They see someone who is representing their community in a way that doesn't represent them. They panic and they want everything to sort of like be right. And that sort of policing and that sort of the respectability politics of it all is just not something I'm interested in entertaining beyond making a joke about it.
Do you find? I'm really curious to know, because you do travel the country, and I basically stick in my little bubble here in San Francisco. Have you found throughout your career that talking openly about all forms of sexuality getting easier, or is that still very challenging?
I think it still depends on where I am. I think most people, they walk into a comedy club and they expect to hear blue humor now. I think, my straight brothers and sisters are also doing that work all around the country as well. Everybody's talking about sex. I think we're seeing the culture sort of move in a more freeing direction, generally speaking. And so I think like people are just a little bit more open to hearing it. And it's like sort of going back to what I was saying before, walking on stage and talking about butt sex is not shocking to a straight audience anymore. It's just not. They're not like scandalized by it. So you're not going to get those shock laughs of like talking about the intricacies of gay sex. It's not like, unless there's a good joke around it. That's what most audiences, I think, care about. Like, we're in the golden age of comedy right now. I mean, we might be at the tail end of it, but most audiences that are going to comedy clubs are smart. They have a diverse comedy diet that they're consuming, and they will recognize a joke versus a gimmick and are going to be sensitive to that. And I think by and large, no matter what the subject matter is, they're going to be more receptive to a well-written joke beyond anything else.
The last thing I want to say then is ask you what are you most interested in talking about now?
What am I most interested in talking about now? Well, I think, and this is frustrating for me because it does on paper seem very sort of well-trod territory that every comedian sort of covers at one point, but I recently turned 30 and I've never had a person say they love me. And that sort of existential angst of not finding love and sort of looking for love or giving up on finding love is sort of where I'm at right now. And
So I'm writing a lot about that. And trying to find ways to talk about current events that are stupid, I guess. that have no, that don't reflect any real person's point of view, I suppose that's the biggest one.
Well, Joel Kim Booster, thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much for having me.
Yeah, for
This has
talking.
been fun.
This has been great.